Scientists, what's a disturbing science theory you think can be proven to be true by 2050? Story one, I think that we're going to find out that viral infections have a much larger role to play in triggering diseases than we once previously thought. Maybe a bit more boring than what's in the rest of this thread, but I firmly believe it is the missing key to understanding a lot of things. My professor back at university was adamant that a large proportion of cancers are caused by a foreign pathogen, such as a bacteria or viral agent. He published a few papers but was never taken seriously by the scientific community. Luckily, he was tenured at a major British university, so it didn't affect his research too much. Story 2, plastics everywhere in living beings will have horrible and irreparable consequences. Thanks for mentioning plastics. I'm doing a PhD related to the harms of plastics to human health. That's not considering the harm to other organisms in the environment. Great to see the awareness is growing. As it's been difficult to get causal evidence, maybe we'll have it by 2050. I've always been curious, and you seem to be knowledgeable about this, so I'll ask you. Is there any real evidence of harm caused by microplastics to human health? I find it so frustrating that news articles always talk about microplastics, and even these comments that sound quite frightening, but never mention any real complication or risk or potential illness, just fear. Is it even remotely possible that plastic in the bloodstream is not harmful and doesn't have any effect whatsoever? Story 3. Not much is a theory, rather, it's a prediction. But bacterial infections will get so bad because of the resistance to antibiotics. There have actually been some really positive developments quite recently regarding this. Machine learning drug discovery systems uncovered a new antibiotic that is super powerful and operates across three separate mechanisms, making it difficult for bacteria to adapt to. There have also been modifications to existing last-ditch antibiotics recently that show promise for some time to come. Story 4, PFAS are probably going to mess us up in some horrific ways. It is a catch-all term for a massive variety of distinct chemicals that all use fluorine-carbon molecular bonds. They are used for tons and tons of things. Teflon is one of them, and you've potentially been heating it, scraping it off the bottom of your formerly non-stick pan, and ingesting it for years. But that's just one of many ways you have been exposed to them. They are incredibly useful in some applications and really stupid to use in other applications due to their long-lasting nature. The fluorine-carbon bond is really strong, so it is very hard to break down. There are measurable levels of them in the environment just about everywhere, including in human blood, and some of them aren't very healthy. There is current work in both Europe and the US to regulate some or all of them significantly. There are thousands of them, different molecular structures, each of which behaves differently, binds differently, and has different applications, and more all the time. So the government has to either play catch up to investigate everyone or ban them in broad swaths by class and let the market sort out alternatives. Story 5. That the catastrophic decline of insects and other organisms will trigger complete ecosystem collapse that threatens our very existence. The scariest part of this is it will just all collapse out from under us. And even worse, it's by far the easiest one of these issues to fix. A huge part of this is because of new classes of pesticides that are used worldwide when they need to be banned. Just this one specific type, too. We're causing an ecological collapse just because one single industry is bribing the government to allow them to pollute the world and destroy the foundation of life on Earth. Its smallest creatures. Of all the things here, this is the easiest to fix by far, and we still are not doing anything. Story 6. I'm fairly certain that we're going to see some severely negative psychological consequences from either social media itself or from its early exposure to children. There have been anecdotal cases of people suffering self-esteem or cognitive effects from it, but I think it's going to be a much wider issue. Story 7. The last factor in the Drake equation, the lifetime of a technological civilization. The Drake equation aims to estimate the number of active communicative extraterrestrial civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy at any given time. The most controversial component of this equation is the value that determines the lifetime of one of these civilizations. This value suggests that civilizations with this capacity rarely exceed their projected lifetime in order for there to be overlap between one of these civilizations' existence in space and time and another of these civilizations' existence in space and time. This lifetime value, multiplied by the other factors in the equation, often gives us an answer of one, suggesting that only one active communicative extraterrestrial civilization can exist at any given time in the Milky Way, and this is largely due to the civilization's lifetime. If this lifetime value is true, then it means our civilization has a lifetime, which ultimately means our civilization will die at some point. Story 8. Maybe not disturbing, but we will be able to disprove the extended Turing thesis that says everything in our universe can be simulated with a classical computer. While this thesis is supposedly not true for the majority of computer scientists, we still, at least from what I know, haven't found something that is impossible to be solved or simulated with our transistor-based computers. I think by 2050 we will be able to truly prove without doubt the thesis is not true. Story 9. We may find out that the spectrum of mental illness is much wider than we expected. People are not demotivated, being especially mean or criminally motivated, but rather malfunctioning in their cognitive abilities and emotional regulation. We may not have as much free will as we thought. We may even have to rethink the whole idea of crime and punishment. If a person is malfunctioning, should we punish them or simply fix them and let them go? Is medically suppressing criminal tendencies scientific progress or dystopia? Story 10, not exactly a theory, but Ray Kurzweil predicts we'll have reached the technological singularity. By about then, the technological singularity is the point at which humanity develops an AI capable of developing other, better AI. It would be capable of producing ascendingly higher intelligence at an increasingly rapid pace, eventually resulting in a singularity, where all possible technological advancement is accomplished, and the AI itself has achieved a sort of demi-godlike state, at least compared to ordinary Homo sapiens. Story 11. Whether computers can consciously think. Every major advancement in AI has come about from increases in computing more than simple algorithmic cleverness, though there's some of that too. Right now, the most powerful computer on Earth can roughly equal the level of calculation of the human brain. Computation power roughly doubles every 2 years. If that exponential growth curve holds, and it may not, by 2040 we'll have machines with 1 million times the computation power of a human mind. If simulating consciousness is possible, we'll likely know by then. Story 11. That consciousness and sentience is an inherent part of all life forms, not just humans and higher vertebrates. Yep, we got it from somewhere. Look at your dog and cat, they have a personality. Elephants visit their dead for years. Whales communicate over vast distances. We are animals just like them. I believe it is part of the entire universe, even non-living thing. And I don't mean believe in a hippie. I love everything. I mean that the boundary we drew between living and non-living was drawn simply out of ignorance. And the more we learn, the more we will see that all material has some aspect of life. Story 12. By building advanced AI and trying to replicate human consciousness, this great mystery that humans have struggled to understand and that allows us to ponder existential questions, possess an ego, and generally be human. We may learn that it's nothing more than a phenomenon that occurs when enough neural pathways are allowed to communicate. When we start to build conscious systems, and those systems report to us, I'm feeling sad, now I'm feeling anxious. There's a world going on. I think the mystery of consciousness will just begin to evaporate. Story 13. I think that we will see a scientific heretic. This person's work will be ridiculed in their lifetime, but since the internet never forgets, someone later on will rediscover this person's work and find that it was accurate and useful. This is the person who is going to prove that DNA is more holographic than linear, that you don't need megawatts to move a mountain, only microwatts in time, or any number of other things that seem very unlikely under our current understanding. This person will see things differently. They will prove a different perspective, and once their theories are investigated in earnest, we will see an age of technology that was always in the realm of science fiction or fantasy come to the real world. This person may never see acceptance of their theories in their lifetime, but they will eventually be remembered for changing the world, making the stars possible for, and possibly stabilizing medicine and the advancement of mankind. And I believe it will happen soon. Maybe not in my lifetime, but soon, within 100 years. Story 14. If chronic wasting disease mutates to affect humans, there will be an actual zombie apocalypse. If you'd like to have nightmares tonight, CDWD is caused by a pathogen called a prion, which is a misfolded protein, the same type of pathogen that causes mad cow disease. They infect the other proteins in the brain and cause them to also misfold, which eventually leads to giant holes in the tissue like a sponge. In the late stages of infection, deer essentially become zombies, blind and disoriented. They walk in circles until they starve to death, if not killed by other means. It's highly contagious, has no known cure, can live in the environment indefinitely, and can be taken up and transmitted through plants. Right now, it is only known to infect deer, but there is evidence that it can infect pigs and therefore may be able to infect humans. Story 15. Bugs are conscious and experience a wide range of emotions. We're taught when studying entomology to not anthropomorphize insects because they don't think, only react, and they don't experience emotion. I've never bought it, and evidence is mounting that they are so much like us as I write this. I'm so darn excited about it. The most interesting part to me is that insects have a mostly decentralized nervous system. Many of their behavioral responses to stimuli don't come from the brain, they come from local ganglia instead. I think that using insects as foils to vertebrates may actually give us some ideas to the nature of consciousness. It seemed neurological, sure, but I don't think it just depends on the size or quality of the brain. Insect brains almost exclusively control feeding and vision. They process olfactory stimuli from their antennae with their brains also. On the other hand, that's only part of chemoreception. They can also smell and or taste with their asses, feet, etc., but that doesn't go to the brain for processing. Story 16. Respectfully, I think you overestimate what scientists are capable of. A PhD master's degree doesn't offer superpowers or foresight. I've had the displeasure of meeting multiple scientists in microbiology or pharmaceutical development, and they aren't any wiser or more concerned with the world than me or my peers with bachelor's degrees. They were only really good at growing cells, pipetting, and writing lab reports for their experiments. That's it. Point is, scientists are not superhuman, and we should dispel this notion that they are wise gurus or soothsayers. Story 17. Eventually, we're just going to hit a wall when it comes to computational advancements. We are already pretty close to that with Moore's Law and our current path on advancement in classical computing systems. And within 10 years, we will need to actually do things smarter instead of just smaller and more precise if we want to scale our computing systems in an economical way to meet demand. Within 50 years, if we don't come up with some seriously groundbreaking stuff like commercialized quantum computing, we will hit a wall, and that will cause some serious issues when it comes to supply and demand for the expansion of computing worldwide. Story 18. Wireheads. The more we know about the brain, the more we know how to poke around it, the more we know how to give ourselves all that we want. Pleasure. People will only remain functional to keep the system in place. The rest of existence will be devoted to extreme pleasure seeking, from invasive brain to computer interface. Much of anything else will go into a halt. There will be no space exploration beyond what serves our new pleasures, because nothing in existence will be as compelling as our own designed paradise. Fantasies and escapism mean even those who are extremely disturbed by this new world will seek said technology to escape it. Example wireheading to forget the wirehead world and pretend you live in your desired society where said technology doesn't exist. Story 19. Life-changing scientific breakthroughs generally have two stages. The first is when they are proven to be possible in theory. The second is when they're implemented on a large scale, improving the lives of many people. I know that a lot of people believe that things such as widespread internet access shouldn't be classified as life-changing scientific breakthroughs, even though they changed lives because they're just expansions and improvements on things that already existed, as the internet existed in theory since the 1960s, but the internet wasn't a life-changing scientific breakthrough the day it was invented. It took time for that to happen. Similarly, many of the concepts that were recently proven possible in the past decade aren't going to be recognized as life-changing scientific breakthroughs until they are implemented on a large scale decades from now. Because of this, it's easy to see how, at a glance, there has been a shortage of life-changing scientific breakthroughs over the past 20 years, but it's only because all of the recent ones haven't had enough time to be implemented on a large scale yet. I'm sure that back in the 1950s and 60s, you could make the claim that there were no big scientific breakthroughs happening because things such as more fuel-efficient cars were just improvements on the already existing cars of decades ago. And things like the internet, solar panels, or satellite technology were just wacky inventions peddled by mad scientists with too much spare time on their hands and would never see uses applicable to the average person. I would argue that the new millennium has brought great levels of opportunity to the next generation of scientists, and the innovations of the past 20 years will prove to be life-changing a few decades from now. Story 20. It's not a popular one, but it's something I remember from my environmental sciences, part of environmental engineering course requirement, in case you wondered, which stuck with me. Specifically, the theory is that we've reached a point in regards to environmental protection that we may be doing more damage to the environment by trying to save it than if we let nature run its course. As an example of this, he used a number of massive wildfires that were happening in Florida back in the 90s and pointed to their cause being Florida's no burn laws. which prevented people from doing controlled burns to prevent wildfire. He also noted that while plastics didn't biodegrade in landfills, they also didn't end up in other locations in the environment. Note, it wasn't until recently that plastics became thin enough that wave action or soil motion could easily break them down, producing microplastics. Older plastics didn't suffer this same breakdown. There were other points that he would cite, with the overall theme being that we, as future environmental scientists or engineers, needed to recognize that some innovations may look good in the short term, but we needed to also look forward to long-term effect and make certain that we weren't inadvertently making things worse while trying to make them better. Story 21. I don't call myself a scientist, but I think I'm counted as one. With the amount of data we're producing, I think it'll be very easy to create, at the very least, chatbots or some other artificial forms of our loved ones or ourselves. This might sound good, but technically, and very optimistically, anyone with access to these data can replicate you and your thinking. And this means if we reach a state where we could build very human-looking robots, we might be able to produce a near-perfect copy of a person. Add another 100 years. Who needs humans anymore? Story 22. I'm not sure if it will happen by 2050, but at some point, there's a not insignificant chance that our current understanding of psychology and mental illness will be viewed as barbarically as we currently view the era of lobotomies and mass institutionalism. Psychology as it stands is a sham discipline. It's propped up by common knowledge that has little basis in empirical evidence, and up to two-thirds of psychological studies are unable to be replicated, aka may not be true. The whole model of depression as a chemical imbalance has shockingly little evidence to back it up, for example. We don't actually understand why antidepressants work, or why they work for some people and make it worse for others, or why they may work for a little while and then stop. It's the pharmacological equivalent of accidentally finding stuff that makes people less sad and then throwing them at people to see what sticks. But you also might want to end yourself, and there's no way to know until you take them. And the depression as a chemical imbalance model has failed to deliver significant new treatments in the last several decades, which it should do if it were true. The chemical imbalance concept is only valuable in terms of removing the stigma surrounding the issue and encouraging people to be open and seek treatment. As inconsistent as the treatment may be, it's better than nothing for a whole lot of people. Story 23. It isn't really a scientific theory, but something disturbing that I think we will have to figure out is, what the hell are we? As AI advances and we grow closer and closer to making a sentient artificial life form, we will need to understand how consciousness works almost in its entirety, lest we see a potentially violent future with uncontrollable AI. However, I think the answers we will find on this quest will have a huge existential impact on humanity. For example, when we can fully map out the brain and see how consciousness works, we probably would then have the ability to create a digital brain. If we can create digital brains, we could also use it to uplink our minds and create immortal copies that can be reactivated or cloned upon death. We could also then modify the brain map to whatever types of characteristics that we want. Heck, we could potentially even create new minds, human life, from scratch with full control. But once we reach that point where we can move our minds around, then what exactly is a human? Is it the mind? Is it the body? If you keep using your cloned brain map to create pseudo-immortality, are you human or even a biological life form, truly? Or do you become a digital entity, as the new bodies created are only but a physical extension of the mind? I don't know, I just can't see us progressing down the path of AI without us needing to answer some very difficult questions. Story 24. We are living in a simulation. I think our existence is too weird to be explained. At some point, using our feeble human minds, we can deduce that by the laws of nature, existence itself is a fluke. This explains the popularity of religion, because you can just shut off any questions your brain has about its own existence and ascribe it to a magical, all-powerful being. We really cannot reconcile infinity or something coming from nothing. Those are still issues for the entities running the simulation. But at that point, at least it's someone else's problem. Story 25. The opioid system plays a much larger role in depression and other mental illnesses than anyone wants to admit, or at least wants to publicize. The reason so many depressed people choose to self-medicate with opioids is because they are literally treating chronically low levels of endogenous opioids in their brain. That sort of self-medication does still spiral into addiction and self-destruction pretty reliably, but it's not inevitable. and is more due to ignorance, stigma, lack of support, and lack of a reliable drug supply. In fact, there are plenty of high functioning addicts, yes, air quotes around both terms, out there. Daily users whose doses don't creep up, who don't rob their parents for their habit, who don't even take what we'd think of as recreational doses when they use, who would tell you this in their own words if they weren't so terrified of people finding out that the extremely normal, tax paying, church going professional father of four is also a daily heroin or OxyContin user. Story 26. Someone will clone asterisk a mammoth or other long extinct species. Asterisk, but it won't be a real clone. It'll be a bastardized version of an elephant with some snazzy gene editing to make it hairier and have more mammoth tusks. I could get into a long rant about the reasons they want to do this, but that would just make me angry. All I'll say is that the rewilding and ecosystem arguments are all generally nonsense. And by a massive coincidence, some of the people working in that area have insanely massive egos, coupled with god complexes that would make the Pope blush. Story 27. A deeper understanding of what logicians already know, combined with CP violations of Noether's theorem, would open a whole can of worms. If certain facts are uncovered, we could logically deduce not so fun facts about what it means to exist. Knowledge about the origin, purpose, and future of all that exists might not take eons to achieve. Blissful is the ignorant. Our understanding is growing at an exponential rate. We're nearing the fully vertical slope of that curve, and it will have societal impacts. One of my fun personal theories is that the universe needs biological and non biological computational power to compute itself, meaning we are simply gasoline being combusted in our own personal hell. It's fun because it's the worst case scenario, and very ironic given our use abuse of silicon based computation. Story 28. I'm not going to answer this question per se, but I'd like to correct your understanding of scientific discoveries. Science doesn't prove anything, it finds evidence to suggest something with a certain probability, using the current knowledge of the time. This means what is understood to be true now may not be so in the future. So even if this suggested 2050 discovery is shown to be highly likely, it could very well be discovered to be incorrect further into the future.